1930s, many things were happening, such as the Great Depression, the beginning of jazz music, the Dust Bowl, and the New Deal. Baseball was also a big deal then because Babe Ruth was just coming out of his prime. Boxing was also extremely popular, with Joseph Louis Barrow being one of the best. But aside from that, the topic today is going to be the NFL. In the 1930s, college football was much more popular than the NFL, with Notre Dame being one of the top schools. Most football players coming out of college did not pursue their love for football, but however, some did pursue this dream and enter into the NFL. Now, if you were an NFL player in the 30s, you did not make nearly as much money as you would now. Most players had a side job when they weren't playing football. One of the highest paid players in the 30s was only being paid $125 a year. But nowadays, the average NFL contract is about $2.8 million per year. However, professional football had not been going on very long. It had only started 10 years prior in the 20s. The 1930s season only had 10 teams. Some of the most recognizable names being the Green Bay Packers, Chicago Bears, and the New York Giants, who are still in today's NFL. Some unfamiliar names, however, might be the Chicago Cardinals, Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, the Minnesota Red Jackets, the New York Tornadoes, Portsmouth Spartans, Providence Steamrollers, and the Staten Island Stapletons. Some teams that are not known, however, for being in the NFL are the Brooklyn Dodgers. Some of these teams that we are unfamiliar with seeing them in the NFL may have either later changed their names or left the NFL entirely. Sadly, I cannot tell you who was the MVP or who led any stats, because in the 1930 season, there were no stats kept. Stats would not be kept until the 1933 NFL season. The 1930 NFL season, however, saw a very NFL end to the season, with the Packers coming out on top with a 12-2 record. They beat the Portsmouth Spartans in the NFL championship game, which was not called the Super Bowl. The first Super Bowl would not take place until 1967. The 1931 NFL season was very similar, with the Packers again making the championship game, and once again winning it. This season, however, saw the birth of a new NFL team, the Cleveland Indians, who are known for recently changing their name in the MLB to the Cleveland Guardians. The season also saw the end of two NFL teams, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets and the Providence Steamrollers. The 1932 NFL season ended with a different twist. The Packers once again made it to the NFL championship game, but however, this time, the Chicago Bears beat them in the NFL championship game. The 1932 season saw a new team join the NFL once again, the Boston Braves, who would later become the Redskins, who would later become the Washington football team, who would later become the Washington Commanders. That's a long story, but not enough time to get into that today. The 1933 NFL season ended extremely similar to the previous year, with the Bears again winning the NFL championship, this time against the Giants. This was also the year the Boston Braves became the Boston Redskins. This was also the first year stats were kept. Harry Newman for the New York Giants led the league in passing with 973 yards through the air. With the running backs, Jim Mulzick from the Boston Redskins led the league with 809 yards. And among the receivers, Paul Moss led the league on the Pittsburgh Pirates with 283 yards receiving. This season, 3 new teams joined the NFL. The Philadelphia Eagles, who would later earn a reputation for drafting way too many Georgia players. The Cincinnati Reds, who only lasted one more season in the NFL. And the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, before we go on, I'd like to take a moment real quick and point out a few things. If we look at Paul Moss's stats, it is very apparent that with only 200 yards of passing, and you still led the league in passing yards, it is very obvious that passing was not very popular. The top receivers today, such as Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase, are putting up 1,000 yards or more in a single season. And if you even look at some of the other stats, such as quarterback and running back, teams do not move the ball very much in a game. 1934. The 1934 NFL season resulted in a few rule changes, such as passes that are made incomplete behind the line of scrimmage are fumbles, and incomplete passes will no longer result in 5-yard penalties. This rule was one of the main reasons that passing was so unpopular in the 1930s. This was the season that the Portsmouth Spartans moved to Detroit and became known as the Detroit Lions. This would also be the Cincinnati Reds' last season in the NFL. One team known as the St. Louis Gunners joined the NFL, but then left after this one season. In this year's championship game, the undefeated Detroit Lions and the 8-5 New York Giants faced off in the championship game once again. However, this time, the New York Giants took the trophy home. The quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, Arnie the Flash Herb, passed for almost 800 yards. This led the league in passing yards. Among running backs, Betty Feathers eclipsed the first 1,000-yard rushing season of any player in the NFL, rushing for 1,004 yards that season. Despite the rule changes, however, the Detroit Lions' very own Harry Ebbing led the league in passing yards with only 264 yards. Right now, I'd like to just point out how the evolution of helmets have worked. Here's a 1930s helmet next to a 2024 helmet. The designs were very different from how they are made today. Even though some of them were made with face masks, they were still made out of leather and not plastic, which made them less protective than they are today. 1935. The New York Giants again made it to the NFL championship game, but this time not playing the Bears. This time they played the Detroit Lions. The Bears falling all the way down to last place in the NFL Western Division. This season, however, the Giants were not able to come out on top this season. The Detroit Lions took home their franchise's very first trophy. The 1935 season did not occur any stats taken. I don't know why. 1936 was a very interesting year, considering this was the very first time an official NFL draft was held. With the first pick in the 1936 NFL draft, the Philadelphia Eagles selected the first ever Heisman Trophy winner, halfback Jay Bergwagner. After the Eagles selected this halfback, they immediately traded him to the Bears. He never actually played a snap of football in his career. If you guys have been keeping track, most of the original teams from the 1930 season have had the most success. However, this year, the Boston Redskins not only made it to the championship game, but beat the Green Bay Packers, awarding them their very first NFL championship title. Green Bay this year had the best quarterback and wide receiver duo. Arnie Flash Herb again led the league in passing yards this year, making himself the first ever quarterback to pass over 1,000 yards. 536 of those yards going to his receiver Don Houston, who led the league in receiving yards. The leading running back this year was Tuffy Lemmings from the New York Giants with 830 yards. This season also saw 2 new rules added: a draft shall be held every year to assign college players to their new teams. And any forward pass that is thrown beyond the line of scrimmage is a 5-yard penalty from the spot of the foul. The 1937 season was the year the Boston Redskins moved to Washington, who once again won another championship, this time against the Bears. This was the first season the score was recorded of the championship game. Washington won 28-21. This season also saw the birth of a new NFL team, the Cleveland Rams. This season there was another 1,000-yard quarterback passing, Sammy Baugh from Washington with 1,126 passing yards. Battles, who I personally think has a pretty sick name, who was also on the Redskins, led the league in rushing with 874 yards on the ground. The wide receivers were still lacking this season, with the leader Gaynell Tinsley from the Chicago Cardinals only having 675 yards receiving. 1938. This was the first season that roughing the passer resulted in a 15-yard penalty. Also, if a kickoff went out of bounds, the receiving team would receive it at their own 45-yard line. With the first pick in this year's draft, the Cleveland Indians selected fullback Corbett Davis, the University of Indiana. Corbett was decent at times, but never became the top rusher that had wanted him to be. This season had our first ever MVP, Mel Heon, a center for the New York Giants. Oh, and the Giants, by the way, beat the Packers 23-17 in the championship game. This year, Ace Parker from the Brooklyn Dodgers led the league in passing with 865 yards through the air. Running back Whistler White from Pittsburgh led the league with 567 yards. And receiving, Don Houston once again led the league on the Green Bay Packers with 546 yards. Now we've approached the very last season in today's video, 1939. With the first pick in this year's draft, the Chicago Cardinals selected center Kai Artrich from the Texan Christian University, which is now known today as TCU. Kai was good at times, and without a doubt, worth a top pick, but they missed out on a future Hall of Fame quarterback, Sid Luckman from the Columbia University, who was taken with the second overall pick by the Chicago Bears. This season, the Green Bay Packers came back with a vengeance and beat the New York Giants 27-0 in the championship game. This season, David O'Brien for the Philadelphia Eagles led the league in passing yards with 1,326 passing yards. The running back Bill Omanowski for the Chicago Bears led the league with 699 yards on the ground. And Don Houston, for the third time, led the league in passing yards with 846 yards. The second ever NFL MVP was Parker Hall, running back for the Cleveland Rams. Every era of the NFL has had their GOAT quarterback, Tom Brady being the most notable of recent memory. So, this leads to the question, who was the best quarterback in the 1930s? Well, there are three candidates. The first candidate is Fried Man Benny, who had a solid career, but however did not play his entire career as a quarterback. This makes me rather reluctant to put him as my number one quarterback for the 30s. He deserves an honorable mention for this position, but however, considering he did not play quarterback for the entirety of his career, he goes in my number 3 slot. The second quarterback is a player that I mentioned earlier, Sid Luckman, who would later become a Hall of Fame. But he is only going in the number 2 slot for one reason. He only played one season in the 1930s. He played the 1939 season, but even though he had a Hall of Fame career, he goes in the number 2 slot. This leaves only one other person, Sammy Baugh, who played for the Washington Redskins and won 2 championship games. I like to think of him as similar to Eli Manning, who's only won 2 Super Bowls the entirety of his career. Sammy became the highest paid player when he was paid $8,000 a season after his second championship win. Football has changed since the 1930s. I hope the NFL continues to evolve and to continue just existing, because without the NFL, we would miss the high-action plays and the entertainment like this play right here.
This is an unbelievable call. This is like going for the onside kick against Peyton Manning, because you don't want him to get the ball too many times. You don't think you can hold him out, and here we go. This could decide the game.